Or if the bomb that drops on you gets your friends and neighbors too, there'll be nobody left behind to grieve, and we will all go together when we go. What a comforting fact that is to know.
Hello and thank you for watching the John Doe Prepper channel. I'm your host, John A. Whitman. And what perfect timing this is. I was just wondering what I was going to do for my next video, and then deer season rolled around and I got me an 8-point buck. So if you're wondering why the camera is pointing at the ground right now, that is because I am going to very quickly tell you that if you do not like seeing blood or dressed out animal carcasses hanging from the ceiling, this is probably not a video that you're going to enjoy all that much, or at least this very first part of it you're probably not going to enjoy that much. But yeah, with that being said, I'm going to pan the camera over here, and here it is. Big old carcass. Got the head over there, gonna probably do a European mount with that, which will be very cool. Try and keep the skull intact with the rack still on it. But that is a lot of venison. We've already taken out the tenderloins. I also saved the heart, so that'll probably be a part of this video as well. But the main part of today's video is going to be showing you all how to can venison. So stick around for that, and hopefully it is helpful for you all. All right, so as you can see, we have removed the front quarters of the carcass. And that is just the beginning of pretty much a whole day of processing all this meat. And that is what 2 fully processed front quarters look like, for canning at least. Obviously you could go through there and get good chunks for mincemeat and that kind of stuff, but for today we're just doing canning meat. And so that ends up looking, ignore that, that's what that ends up looking like. Basically very roughly diced, nice red moist chunks of meat. Now to do the same thing with the back strap and then the hindquarters. And there's the back straps. Same thing. Cut out all the silver skin and the tallow, and you're left with nice moist red meat for canning. This is the good stuff. All right, so before we fully remove the hindquarters, I thought it'd be interesting to show you guys the inside of the chest cavity, more specifically the entry wound right there, and then the exit wound. That is what hunting rounds do, soft points in this case. They expand inside the body, so you have an exit wound that is like twice the size of your entry wound, which is pretty freaking gnarly. But yeah, just thought that'd be kind of interesting. There you go. And here is all that's left after we've stripped all of the meat off that is good for canning. And obviously what we have left over is, you know, some of this is technically good for canning, but it's just a real pain the way we can with like thicker pieces of basically stew meat. A lot of this, after you remove all the tallow and the silver skin and everything, it's just too thin for that. But this would be good to just like cut into thinner strips and fry up or grind into hamburger. Same with a lot of the refuse in here. Like this is too thin to can with the method that we do it, but again, you could easily put a little bit more work into this and turn it into mincemeat. And whatever we don't use left over from all this, you know, the ribs and all that, the little bit of meat still left on all these bones, we live in a bald eagle and falcon habitat area, and those birds are somewhat endangered in this area. So whatever we end up not using, or whatever we end up just taking too long processing this animal to use, like it starts to go bad, we'll leave out for those, birds of prey and scavengers and such. So even the meat we end up not using is not really going to waste. It's going right back into the ecosystem where we took this deer from. But yeah, just thought I'd give you guys one last little look at what this carcass kind of looks like after the sort of initial rough stages of processing, getting all the good sort of stew meat material off of it. There you go. All right, so for those of you lovely viewers who have stuck with me through all of the mild animal gore in this first part of the video, your reward is that I shall now regale you with the tale of how I came into possession of this buck in the first place before we go on to the second part of this video where I go through the process of actually canning all of the stew meat that I just butchered. So it was yesterday, at the time of recording, that me and my dad went out on the opening day of deer season to this old deer stand that me and my dad built together when I was like 12 or 13, something like that. So we went out to the stand, we saw a few does, and then that was kind of about it. So after about 4 or 5-ish hours, we climbed down from the stand and headed home to kind of have breakfast and take a break, and then head out again to the stand in the evening. And about an hour after we got back to the house, my dad was washing dishes in the sink, and he looks up, and all of a sudden there is a buck out in our field. So we get out of the house, throw on our blaze oranges, and we stalk the deer until we see it about 200 yards away in the middle of this big old field that is basically our backyard. At that point, we kept sneaking up closer and closer to this deer until we were about 200 yards away from it. At that point, my dad handed me the deer rifle that we were sharing for the season, set the dial on the scope to 200 yards, and basically just let me take the reins from there. So I watched the deer through the scope, waited for it to finally stop walking. I had an almost perfect broadside, lined up the reticle, squeezed the trigger, boom, and the deer went running. And so at first I was actually kind of worried that I may have missed it. But then when me and my dad got to tracking it, we found a little clump of hair right where the deer had been standing, which proved that I had in fact hit it. And then we found only like 1 or 2 drops of blood about 50-ish yards further afield. And then we found the body of the deer right at the edge of the woods, only 75 to 100 yards away from where I had shot it. Through the process of gutting the deer, we discovered that I had gotten a perfect double lung shot. So the bullet had entered right about here, gone straight through both lungs, and then come out the other side. So it was a little bit further back than ideal. The perfect shot for that area would have been through both lungs and the heart. But a double lung shot obviously dropped him in about 5 seconds or less, so it was still a fairly clean kill, all things considered. And just to sort of preemptively answer the question that I know I will get, which is, John, which rifle did you use? I will now show you. This is my dad's deer rifle of many, many, many years. I'll make sure it is unloaded here. 30-06 soft points, Remington core locked, and the chamber is empty, so this gun is safe. This is a Remington 700, chambered in, as I said before, .30-06 Springfield. So this is the FUD deer rifle. And the scope on it, I don't know the exact model off the top of my head. Ah, lovely. It says right on here. It is a Leupold. And of course my glasses are not working very well. It is a... Can I read that? Yes, a Leupold VX SHD 3-16 by 44 millimeter. This is a very, very, very nice scope. It set my dad back about $1,200. It has a laser reticle illuminator and a bunch of other fancy features like a dial that you can literally just adjust to the distance that you're shooting at, so you can just put the crosshair dead on, which is what made it fairly easy for me at 200 yards to get a long shot on that buck. But that is the rifle that took down the mighty 8-point buck. And many, 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 many more before that in the hands of my dad, who has taken at least 2 trophy bucks that I know of with this same rifle. This thing has got bodies on it. Fortunately, they are all deer bodies, but you know what I mean. Anyway, that is the rifle, and I am very happy to say that my dad, being the awesome guy that he is, has told me that since he's kind of getting a little bit older and can't handle the .30-06 recoil as well anymore, that someday this rifle will be mine for free, which is obviously great because this is a fantastic rifle with a fantastic scope. But anyway, that is the story in a nutshell. And what you just saw previously with the whole process of butchering the skinned and dressed out carcass of the buck is the day after I shot the buck, and me and my dad strung it up, gutted it, skinned it, removed the head, all that good stuff. So today, with all the butchering, that was day 2, and the next part of the video after this little spiel that I just told you the story will be day 3, which will be the process of canning all of that stew meat that me and my dad just removed from the carcass and diced up. So I hope you all enjoy the final stretch of this, what will probably be a very long video of the canning process, and I hope it is helpful to you all in your own preparedness journeys. Okay, today is the start of the canning process, the final stretch of this video. You can see the first thing I did was wash the crap out of this pressure cooker that we will be using. Also, just a quick note before the rest of this canning portion of the video starts, I'm hoping to kind of make this part of the video a bit more instructional than the part where I went over sort of the processing of the carcass. And to begin with that, trying to make this more instructional goal, pressure cookers can be very dangerous if you use them improperly, even without all sorts of bad actors using them to build IEDs out of. There are plenty of people who have been seriously injured and even killed from improperly using and or handling their pressure cooker. So always make sure to read the owner's manual and don't do stupid stuff with things that have to bear high amounts of pressure. There's your legal disclaimer so no one sues me over this video. Alright, so I have thoroughly washed and rinsed all of these jars and all of these lids. You want to make sure you rinse them all very thoroughly because the taste of soap is not very good. So make sure you rinse them very, very well. And now that I finished washing and rinsing and doing all that to the jars, I have now done the same thing to the pressure canner, this lovely little device. So as you can see overnight in the fridge, a lot of blood has settled out of this stew meat, so we are patting them all dry in paper towels. We have this cast iron skillet with vegetable oil and a little bit of bacon grease in it, and we are going to brown the stew meat in that pan after patting it dry. That is step one of this canning process. There are many recipes for this, but this one is ours. And this is the first batch of meat in the pan. Hopefully you can hear me over the deafening sizzling that is happening currently. And when your chunks of venison look like this, they are properly browned. Then you flip them over and rinse and repeat until they look like that on all sides. And we have our first batch of jars ready to insert the meat. We warmed them up on top of the toaster there. We just turned it on to a certain temperature, put the jars on upside down to warm them up. And I just put a slice of onion into the bottom of each jar. And from here, we add the chunks of meat once they are done browning. We got a little bit of live action for this next part. I'm now going to start putting this meat, freshly browned, into the jars. So I'm just going to pick up chunks and just pack them in loosely into each jar. You do not want to try and pack this tightly, because that can mess all sorts of things up later on in the canning process. I'm using tongs because obviously these are just freshly browned, so they are still quite hot because they came right off the pan into the jars. But as you can see, so far this process is fairly simple and straightforward. Now to brown the next frying pan full of meat and do the same thing. Rinse and repeat for all the jars. After each batch of venison that you fry to brown, you're going to want to replace the oil with fresh oil, otherwise it will kind of taste a bit fishy. So that's what we're doing right now. Quick note about filling jars in this way. When you can meat, you want to leave about 1 inch of headspace, meaning you want from the top of the jar down 1 inch. You don't want any meat or liquid or anything else above that 1 inch mark, which on these jars, being care jars, the top of the K is right about at a little bit greater than 1 inch of headspace, which is just about perfect. Just something to keep in mind. And once you have enough meat in one of the jars, you take another slice of the onion and you put the slice of the onion on the top like this. And after we add the second slice of the onion, we add a teaspoon of salt to each jar. Make sure if your recipe calls for salt, you use pure canning salt. Do not use just regular table salt, because that has fillers in it that will make your stuff look cloudy and it's just kind of nasty looking. And now we have filled each of these jars with boiling beef broth. So we got it to a rapid boil, then poured it in here, once again factoring in that roughly 1 inch of headspace we need. You can see the onion likes to float, but that is okay. There we go. Now we wipe off the rims of the jars clean with a wet rag, and then attach the lids as per the manufacturer's instructions. So we put the lid on, make sure it is properly centered with the seal and all that. You take your ring and you just thread it on using your fingertips until it just stops moving. And that's as tight as you need to get it, because it's not the pressure of the ring holding this cap on, it's vacuum pressure when these cans cool down after pressure canning them that causes a vacuum seal that holds the lid in place. The ring is just there to make sure the lid doesn't come off during that process. It's not there to hold it down tight and make it seal. So we now have the jars in the pressure canner with 3 quarts of water and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar to prevent the water from staining the jars as they pressure seal in the canner. All right, we have the first batch of cans in the pressure canner and we have the burner on. What we're gonna do, according to the instructions for this specific pressure cooker, we're gonna wait until we have a steady plume of steam coming out of this pressure release pipe. Once that plume starts coming out steady, we're gonna wait for 10 minutes, at which point we will then put the pressure regulator on this pipe, which is literally just a steel weight that sits over that pipe. I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but there's our steady steam plume. 10 more minutes of this, and on goes the regulator. All right, we have thrown on the pressure regulator. It's just that little thing right there, the little weight that sits over the pressure release pipe. Now we're gonna wait until the dial indicator gets up to 15 pounds, and then we will set the timer for 1 hour. And we will pressure can this venison at that 15-pound pressure, which just so happens to be the maximum for this particular pressure canner model, for 1 hour. And I will, once that hour has elapsed, I will talk to you all about the process of letting this cool and then determining if it is safe to open. All right, we are up to 14 pounds of pressure. We're trying to get up to 15. Once you reach the pressure you want, or in this case need, I suppose, rather than want. Once you reach the pressure you need, you basically keep adjusting the burner setting to maintain the pressure you want and kind of keep it at a constant. But we are almost there, and you can hear that pressure regulator's really hissing. All right, so our 60-minute timer just went off. So we have turned the burner off and taken the pressure cooker off. Now we let it slowly cool down. And this is where you want to be very careful to not open this prematurely, because you could very, very severely scald yourself with superheated steam if you do. This particular model has several safety features to prevent you from doing that. For example, that right there is a pressure indicator that also locks the lid. As long as it's popped up, there is pressure. Once that lowers back down, it unlocks the lid, at which point you then remove the pressure regulator, or you rock it and see if steam is still venting. You keep doing that, keep rocking it until steam no longer vents from it, then you can remove it, and then you let it cool down the rest of the way before finally removing the lid. Okay, so the pressure gauge is at 0, but as you can see, the pressure indicator is still up. And if I do a little test, it still hisses. So this is not yet safe to open. Figured I would show you that, since it's kind of an important distinction to make. It is not safe to open just because the dial is at 0. And now, as you can see, the pressure indicator is down, which means if I lift this, there's no hiss, which means I can now remove that pressure regulator, and we will let this sit for a couple more minutes, and then it will be safe to open. And here are the jars that we just finished pressure canning. Hopefully you can hear me over this very loud fan. I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but hopefully you can kind of see it. Some of the jars, the contents of them, are still boiling, which is very cool and is not at all abnormal. So if that happens to yours, don't freak out. here's the first jar out of the pressure canner, and as you can see, the broth inside is still boiling. Now as these cool, they generate vacuum pressure inside the jar, and that sucks the lid down. There's the second one, also still boiling. That creates a nice vacuum seal so that there's no air inside the can, so that the meat and the onions and the broth don't go rancid or rotten or whatever else. And the heat and pressure from the canning process kills any botulinum spores so that you don't get botulism and die, because that would be quite unfortunate. All right, the cans have started, there we go, tinking. There's another one. This is our third batch of jars this day, and we got probably another 3 batches left to do tomorrow. So let this be a lesson to any of you that want to go deer hunting. Once you actually shoot the deer, the easy part is over. There goes another one. Hope that was somewhat entertaining. And with that, the venison canning video shall come to an end. I would show you the other 3 batches that we're gonna can tomorrow, but it's kind of just more of the same, and I think that would kind of get boring after a while, so I'm just going to end it here. But I hope you all found it helpful, or at least entertaining. And by the time you are seeing this video, I will either be already uploading or will have already uploaded a second video to the channel, because the channel just reached a fairly minor milestone, but it's my first time hitting that milestone, so it's kind of a big deal to me, at least. And that is that we hit 50 subscribers, so thank you all very much for that. There will be a 50 subs special coming out, which also has to do with venison. I think it's kind of cool. I hope you do too. And with that being said, thank you so much for subscribing to the channel, for watching this very long video all about processing a deer carcass and turning it into canned stew meat. And thank you for being a part of this very fun little YouTube journey that I am on. And I will see you all in the 50 subs special video. Bye.
We will all go together when we go, all suffused with an incandescent glow. No one will have the endurance to collect on his insurance. Lloyds of London will be loaded when they go.